I mean, the myths about suicide they are pretty numerous, and they're hard to counter because they're entrenched. Suicide is scary and fearsome. It's a dismal topic, and I think that's only natural insofar as it means death and killing both in one act. It scares people. I feel like if we can explain this and understand it deeply and fully, that'll put light on it. And if you put light on things, stigma starts to go away naturally. It's a real tragedy that we've got to do better at preventing, and that we've got some hope in doing that. But we've got a lot of work to do too. My name is Thomas Joyner. I'm a professor of psychology, the Robert O. Lawton Distinguished Professor of Psychology at Florida State University. I'm a psychologist, clinical psychologist, and a researcher. For decades, I've been at it, researching why it is that people die by suicide and how we can prevent it. It's roughly a 3-factor model. 2 of the factors explain why people desire to die in the first place. Perceived burdensomeness. I feel like I'm a burden, and therefore my death will be worth more than my life to other people. That's it in a nutshell. Thwarted belongingness is really just loneliness or alienation. You feel both those things simultaneously, and you're hopeless about that state of affairs ever changing. To the model, that's what produces suicidal desire. But lots of people want to die by suicide. In fact, a lot of people desperately want to. That doesn't mean they will, because when it comes to the actual prospect, it's very difficult and hard and painful and fearsome. You need a third variable, the wherewithal variable, the capacity variable, to facilitate the desire. And if you don't have it, you're not going to be able to do it, even if you really desire it. So that's that's what I meant by 3 factors. It's 3 factors coming together, and when they do in the same person, that's what produces these catastrophic deaths. There's a theme that runs throughout a lot of human philosophy, moral ethics, over the course of actually millennia. For Freud, for instance, it was love and work, famously. That's just a variation of that same age-old theme of there are kind of pillars of human nature, 2 main pillars of it. And one is just feeling like you matter, like you can affect things in the world around you. And the other is that you feel like you're connected socially, that you belong. Those 2 pillars make a lot of sense if you think about it ancestrally and evolutionarily. You needed to pull your own weight. You need to have some efficacy, to live in hard times. But we're social creatures, and we couldn't survive ancestrally without each other. That's incidentally why we're so sensitive to feeling left out and feeling like we don't belong. In the ancestral environment, if that happened to you, it was death. It meant death. The question for me has always been, how does this happen to humans? And it would be informative to know if it only happens in humans. Reading people like Freud and Schneidman, those guys, they all were convinced that this is a purely human thing. And they said it repeatedly. And I they're authorities, so I bought that. But then I started reading more widely, and that's not true. I mean, it's just simply not the case. There are a lot of species, non-human species, that clearly inflict their own deaths on purpose. Now, some of them, you can't say they're really thinking about it because they don't have minds as such. In fact, one case of this is a kind of mold that does this, kind of bacterium. It's very common in the social insects, things like bees, termites. ants. There are multiple species of ants who, when, for example, the individual ant gets infected with a parasite and therefore is truly a threat to the rest of the colony, it leaves the nest. Doing that, just like with humans ancestrally, doing that is certain death. So it trades certain individual death for the lives of the colony, of ants in the colony. And I knew about those species, but I always thought, well, that's not going to have a whole lot of relevance to humans because they're not mammals. But if there were a mammal that did this, that would be different. And then within the last 15 years or so, I chanced upon literature on this species, this organism called the naked mole rat. And sure enough, they have the same social organization as ants do and as humans do. In other words, they're really interdependent on one another. They have division of labor. They take care of the young in kind of cooperative fashions. It just struck me as amazing that the only species in which clear purposeful self-sacrifice occurs, in all of those species, though that they have the same social structure. That's a really strange coincidence, or that's meaningful. And I assumed it was meaningful and pursued it. We have such an incredible luxury of this neurobiology, but it's not perfect. And mostly it solves problems instead of produces problems, but it's not perfect, and so it does produce occasional problems, and this is one of them. I think this is a misfiring. I think maybe that misfiring idea is unique to humans. That's the piece that maybe Schneidman and Freud and all of them were onto, is that there is something that's uniquely human about this. It's just not what they thought it was. They thought it was suicide itself. I don't think that's right. I think it's this misfiring of that module that we share across nature. They self-sacrifice, the ants and the mole rats and the shrimp. They do it under conditions of where it really is for the best. Humans, that's not. That might have been true a long time ago ancestrally, like hundreds of thousands of years ago kind of thing, but it's not true anymore. Now it's a misfiring. Now it's something that if you do it, if you're trying to save people trouble and cost and emotional pain, this is the last thing that you would do, because it's going to impose all that and more for years and decades, not just on one person, but on many across generations. It's one of the most costly things that you can imagine to do. And so it's the last thing you'd want to do. But this misfiring idea is that people get themselves in mental states to where this seems like a really good thing to do. The most costly thing, the worst idea possible for generations, becomes in their mind a good idea. That's the power of these mental disorders, is that it takes something that's so obviously costly and so obviously not the right thing to do in terms of like helping the family, and makes it seem very proper. It's incredible, the power of these mental disorders. That's a reflection of their powers. They can change something clearly not a good idea into thinking that's not only a good idea, but that's the solution. That's powerful. The state of, sort of misery and agony that people are in suicidal crises, and not just in any suicidal crisis, because I do think there's a spectrum of them, but I'm talking about ones that prove lethal. In those crises, I think there may be a quality to the anguish that might be beyond words. Even it's so qualitatively distinct, and in that state, it feels so painful, and it also feels intolerable, and it feels permanent. And if you put those things together, you can see why people do desperate things. The states of anguish are hard to conceive of. But I don't think you need to fully conceive of them, and I don't think that you need to actually experience these states of anguish to have some empathy for them. It's just whatever your worst moment has been in your life. We've all been in dark places. Whatever that is, multiply that by 10 or 100 or 1,000, and that's what we're talking about. It's not too hard to empathize with that. In that understanding, then it's not that hard to conceive of it getting so bad that someone will get desperate. I think everybody can take that away and empathize and understand and sympathize, and then also absorb the idea that small improvements, they feel like the world to somebody in that state of misery. If you take anguish that's of such a level, so magnified, and you just bring it down a little bit, that's a tremendous difference to the person going through it. And the news about that for everybody, all of society, people who don't care about this topic and people who've been immersed in it for decades, everybody in between, the news is that small human acts of caring and connection and purpose, things that come naturally to most of us anyway, are integral in suicide prevention. And so we can all be suicide preventionists in that way. We kind of are that already. We just need to get that message out a little bit deeper and further so that we do a better job. Because we're not doing that great a job right now in suicide prevention. Neither are we doing that bad a job. But what's indisputable is that we've got a ways to go in terms of doing better. And I think we're on our way.